Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Today's episode number 62. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko. I am a former immigration lawyer turned entrepreneur. I am the founder of Laborless, which is an H-1B visa compliance tech startup, and the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing agency for immigration and global mobility businesses, and of course, which brings you this show. Um, our guest today is actually joining us all the way from Italy, which is very special because we're recording this in sort of the early afternoon here in New York City. So it's pretty late in the evening in Italy. I'm very grateful. So our guest today is David Cantor, who is the CEO and founder of Relocate. Relocate.world is the full company website. And Relocate is basically kind of a marketplace for connecting people who are interested in moving to a particular country with content and information around, kind of visa and travel questions and things related to that country. And then through that, connecting with actual licensed and vetted immigration lawyers and other immigration professionals who can help them get into that country and deal with whatever immigration questions or visa applications that they have. So it's a really cool platform. It's web-based, and the idea there is that user-friendly. You can learn what you need to learn, connect with the people you need to connect with right through the platform, and then kind of hopefully relocate to the country that you are looking to move to. So I'm excited to learn more about David and his journey, actually being an immigration lawyer here in the U.S. and sort of becoming this immigration entrepreneur. I guess we sort of have a similar journey. So I'm not going to speak for David. And David, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you joining us
Yeah,
today.
my pleasure. I mean, thanks for having me.
And thanks for again. I know it's evening. I could see it's kind of dark behind you out the window. So I appreciate you staying up and hanging out in the evening.
It's my pleasure. And I'll do my best to be live, right? My brain tends to shut off after like 9 o'clock,
All right.
generally
Well,
speaking, you know.
so we're like
Um,
right there. It's like it's
yeah,
8 o'clock in Italy
on,
right now, right?
that's right. On a Friday, and everybody knows how it is, and you know, post Thanksgiving holidays, but we're all good. I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate the introduction.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
For folks who are watching or joining us live, please give yourself a shout out. Tell us where you are, who you are, where you work, etc. And then, of course, as always, ask questions. Right, as David is sharing his story, and we're going through, what he's done, and eventually what Relocate does. Ask questions and let us know your thoughts, etc. I love to bring up the questions and comments and address them live. I mean, that's sort of the fun of doing this live. So definitely give yourself a shout out there. And as the conversation goes, if you like it, give it a thumbs up or a little heart or show some love. Um, so
Well,
David, you're in Europe now. I know that you originally or earlier on you were a U.S. immigration lawyer, I guess, much like me, except for a much longer period of time. I didn't practice for very long. But you went to school, I believe, in Illinois, right, into
that's right.
college.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
so tell me a little bit about like pre-lawyer David. I mean, are you from New York? Are you from Chicago? Are you from somewhere totally different? Like, what's kind of the backstory?
Yeah, yeah. As a New York native, you kind of get that. So originally from New York, right? But Long Island. So not the island of Manhattan,
Right.
which is a country in its own right, as we all know. But yeah, grew up in New York and heading to undergraduate, my mother basically said, you can go anywhere you want, but don't go past the Mississippi. I have no idea this arbitrary border, but I went pretty close. And yeah, I had a great 4 years of undergraduate in Urbana-Champaign, and spent a little bit of time in Chicago after that, living and working in digital marketing, actually. I went to the College of Business and University of Illinois, and really was hustling, trying to make a living and figure out a career path, right? Which anyone who leaves undergraduate, I don't know, my experience, I was sweating through my graduation robe. I remember that, in the commencement speech, because I felt kind of the future just imposing, right? And it's like, what am I going to do next? So that reality hit pretty hard and fast. And, there was kind of a nonlinear way to get to where I am now. And after fast forward a little bit, after undergraduate school and working in Chicago, um, just left the U.S. Decided to take a break in my work. Somebody handed me a Lonely Planet travel book. I had no idea what backpacking was. I had no idea what a youth hostel was. Next thing I know, I'm in this kind of community of, individuals who are moving around in Central America and Guatemala. And I was gone for 3 weeks. And I was like, as an American, I was like, 3 weeks. That like Americans like, how are you getting away for 3 weeks? What are you going to do for 3 weeks? And when I went there and I met, some of the first companions, and it's a visceral experience when you first uproot and you do something new like this. And I found people were traveling for 6 months. Like these two Israeli guys, for example. I remember was carrying a surfboard from northern Mexico and going all the way down through Central America and into Patagonia region, and they were traveling for 6 months. So I was like, pretty, it was mind blowing for me, right? And like the world is out there, something to go after. So those are some early stage transformative periods. But I don't think you brought me on the show to talk about my backpacking days in my 20s. I'm happy to.
I actually would love to talk about your backpacking days in your 20s, because I think that's so key to, I think when you become an immigration attorney and you work with clients from all over the world, having traveled to many different parts of the world, at least in my experience, is hugely helpful to empathize with cultural differences, to sometimes even something as simple as like working through someone's accent if they're trying to speak to you in English and English isn't their first language. So I actually think that's hugely important. In fact, a lot of immigration lawyers are immigrants, but for the ones who aren't, many of them did travel. So I'm curious, I guess, where did you travel? So this was after law school or before law school?
No, before. This was before, and kind of the in-between phase. And that was just a little stint. 3 weeks.
Right.
And, I came back to Chicago. I was like, okay, something's got to change. I know there's a lot out there. So I decided to pick up and do what I could do. Didn't have much money at that time. And so I taught English. I could speak English. I have an undergraduate degree from a school of business. But that's a pedigree, at the end of the day. And so I went to Asia where there was job opportunities for English-speaking native English speakers. As you can tell, I'm very eloquent in English. And yeah, so it was a weird experience. I went basically straight into China and spent time there, bouncing around, mainly in Beijing for the beginning. So thrown right into like a big city. And got paid as an English teacher for about 6 months there. Didn't know much about China other than, an encyclopedia that I had in, my basement that I opened up before I went and dug into the culture. I think I was just craving something that was completely different from what I knew and understood, right? And it ended up being that. Doors just continued to open on this journey. And like I said, I didn't have much money at that time. So whatever I was earning through teaching English, I started to spend on travel. I started to travel low to the ground and visit places where, I think and believe that, maybe no white person set foot before. And I say that because I think the furthest experience that I ever had, probably to this day, that left a big impact, was meeting up with a nomadic family. I missed a bus in this one-horse town in Hezhou, which is a little province of China. And because of that, I ended up in some cafe to spend the night. And there was a table next to me of, monks. They were dressed in robes. And it took me a little bit to realize that they weren't monks. They were Tibetans, wearing a traditional like orange cloth, right? The kind of that burnt orange cloth. And one of them came over and approached me, and he spoke a bit of broken English, and we started to chat. And next thing I know, one of them had invited me to their family to stay with their family and live with their family in the grasslands in Tibet. So I changed my plans. I didn't really have plans, and hopped on another bus, and then met his father and his brother, who picked us up on a couple of red Honda CRV motorcycles. And we went, into the grasslands, and there was no path, and kept going, and I ended up sleeping there for about 10 days, overstaying my welcome, probably, living close to the earth. And I guess I mentioned this, just because it was really something that still stays with me today. And it shows you the power of just coincidence and going places where maybe you've never been before, and the visceral connections that you can have with people in this world.
100, definitely. I can't. It's so cool. I mean, I'm just picturing having that experience and having these people take you in is really amazing. And so
Yeah,
I guess
it's
with
special.
that experience and some of these travel experiences, I guess you eventually ended up going to law school. I'm curious, did you want to pursue anything related to international something, business, travel, maybe immigration, or did you kind of go to law school, in this vein of, okay, I've traveled, I've seen the world, I'm going to go back to America now and sort of pursue further education and have that as an experience, but not as a guide for my career. I'm curious if you did
No,
connect the
excellent.
two or you didn't.
Interesting. Yeah, there was always that. I was carrying around books for the LSATs and GREs, and um, had always thought that there was maybe something else that I needed to do to define a career path, and maybe going back to the academia later in time would be that, but I didn't know what. And I kind of narrowed down through these experiences, knowing that I wanted to do something in the international realm and that space. And again, didn't know how to define that. Law school and going to get a degree, a legal degree, was something that struck me for several reasons. I think it was some of those far-reaching pillars of what the law is, and questioning what that is and how that influences society, and right governance, and how it can be used as an instrument for good. And I didn't know much about it, and the more I dug into it, I realized it was broad enough to have some type of intellectual departure, right? And I knew there was an international spectrum to that as well. I didn't know what yet. Um, so I was motivated and inspired, I think, by some of these pillars, right? And it was reflected in, the letter that I wrote to go to law school, and I believe that's why I was accepted. I don't think it had to do with my grades or backpacking experience in the grasslands of Tibet. But all that said, Roman, I mean, also another truth is, I needed a bit of discipline, you can say. I felt there was I was going on this journey and on this path, but I felt a little bit lost, right? And for me, law school, I've heard stories. I knew it was going to be intense, but I felt it was going to be a good intense, in a way, kind of a discipline. And it proved to be that. I was fortunate to fall into a law school that permitted me to have some flexibility, to pursue areas of interest, in so much as studying comparative law and going back to China 2 years later for a comparative law course that I got credits for, that no other law student had done in the history of the law school, and I got credits for that, and was able to keep that bridge, and just magnify the experiences with a degree, and go from there.
What was it like? So I know you went to New York Law School. So shout out to all the New York City regional law schools.
Yes.
I went to Brooklyn Law, so I was also down
Ah,
here in the area.
right on.
And then you went to and then you got your you went over to China. Um, how long were you in China for? Was that a semester or a full year?
Well, I was there through that period of time around 4 different times,
Okay.
right? Almost for a total of 3 years, right? If you add up all the aggregate the experiences, um, the schooling, the law school at Tsinghua University. Um, it's strange because actually you mentioned Illinois. When I first went to Tsinghua, and I never visited the campus. I mean, I visited, but I didn't really remember it years later when I went. It was like a replica architecturally of University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And I dug in a little bit more, and when I was walking around, it's like there's like a mini version of the quad, in Urbana-Champaign, and it turned out it was. So they were inspired by that design. So it was kind of a weird coincidence, but yeah, it was a total of a year, right? with you take half a semester and then to complete an LLM, which I went back after law school to complete as
Mm.
well. There's a really, really interesting ecosystem of international students, some from the States and obviously from other countries that came here to study comparative law, immerse themselves in, the language and culture. And, that was an underlying thread, I think, for many people being there. So, it's always nice to be around that.
Mm. That's
In
really cool.
academia, especially. Yeah.
And so you got your JD here, you got also your LLM over in China. And did you know at this point that you wanted, were you focusing on something international? Was immigration even on your radar? And sort of, how did you eventually fall into it?
No, it's a great question. There were immigration courses, there were professors that, I had a good rapport with, had done research with at New York Law School, that were, in the international sphere. And again, that I wasn't, I think, even forward thinking enough to say, oh, there's a career you can make in immigration law as an immigration lawyer, in that sense. I knew that there was a lot of work to be done in kind of refugee and asylum and deportation and human rights elements of that in the States. But I never gave a hard, honest thought to, okay, I can do this when I actually get out of law school. So for me, again, it was, I came out and hung up a shingle, after, well, getting the license is another matter. The stories to be told there, third time around, and, first time missing, going to the wrong testing place.
Oh no.
Yeah, in Manhattan, in the on the west side, fighting a guy that he took the taxi in front of me, and I couldn't catch a taxi near, Chelsea Pier. So I never got settled. Not making excuses, but yes, finally ended up actually vesting the bar. I was studying for the bar while I was actually in China getting the LLM, and came back to New York, and yeah, I hung up a shingle. I was doing everything. I was in the courts, things that were completely unrelated to immigration. I was living in Chinatown at that time, and above a Chinese supermarket. I know there's a lot of China going on here. It definitely, there's a Chinese supermarket. I lived in Chinatown, but I was, above there was like all these different, you can say it was a directory of businesses. And I saw like a name of an immigration lawyer, Chinese immigration. So I knocked on his door. It was right next to like a guy who gave massages, and in an airlines, ticketing agency. And, I knocked on his door and we spoke, and he had all these like I-485s hanging on his wall, I-130s. And I've never seen those before. And I'm like, well, what do you do here? We started to talk a bit. And he kind of just said, well, you have a degree. Well, why are you doing this? I said, I don't know. I don't know how to start. I don't know how to get clients. I don't know what to do. Okay, I'm on AVO, but I don't have the experience, right? So he threw a few cases my way. And I started to work on some of those. And yeah, that was kind of, that opened up a bit of the doors to the world of immigration. And it was just, my first case was my wife's as well, so that was a bit of pen to paper, and there just opened up some more doors and started to got lucky a bit, and that's kind of where I fell into a bit of the private practice about a year and a half after.
Did you continue to work on your own before you really fell in or kind of went headfirst into immigration law?
No, actually, when I started with the firm, I was pretty wet behind the ears.
Mm-hmm.
It was new, and it was like a Craigslist posting, and I applied to this, and I was working on a different venture at the time as well that was related to endorsing licenses of foreign medical professionals. And I was working on that with an Italian doctor who had her licenses endorsed in New York State. And it was a project that I believe had merit, and nobody was offering those professional services. And so this kind of caught the eye of a principal of a firm, because he was also working on something that was somewhat similar in that situation. And had a few interviews there in New York, and it's a boutique firm that I've been with up until the point of transitioning into this venture.
And that's Davies and Associate, right? Davies and Associates, yeah.
Yeah,
So they're based over here in New York.
Mark Davies, yeah. He's the chairman of the firm, and I met him in Park Avenue, which feels like ages ago. And he was a great mentor. Still is. So it was, yeah.
That's awesome. So you worked, with this Chinese immigration lawyer. He threw some cases your way. You worked on your wife's. So were you, and just on your wife's case, were you married and kind of getting your wife into the U.S. Or like were you, was it a K-1? I'm just curious because I feel like I remember my first immigration case for sure, and it wasn't my family member. So I'm assuming this was very memorable.
Yeah, this was a good one. I mean, it was a colorful one,
Yeah.
and got to go into the interview in Federal Plaza, put together a string of our emails, and provide photos. I even think we brought like a video from our wedding into the interview. And I was like, do you want to watch this? It's like, oh, I wish I could, but we don't have like an AV unit here, But yeah, it was, I think having a degree, and obviously, kind of the work, even hanging up a shingle and appearing before judges and in the courts beforehand and doing real legal work and representing individuals, gave somewhat of a confidence to do these formalities. And, it was, again, it feels like ages ago, but yeah, we didn't marry for the green card.
Right.
I mean, we're still together. Just I got my 2 kids out there.
Of course. Of
I
course.
thought it was part of her master plan. I thought it was done after that, but no, it's
No,
still good.
turns out it
Yeah.
was the real deal, huh?
It was the real deal. It was the real deal. But it was definitely part of the strategy. I mean, we had a civil ceremony, and we had a celebration later. So there was an element of, hey, we got to figure out a way for you to kind of stay here, and she carved her own path in many ways before we even had to get to that point. So
that's really cool. It's
Mhm.
like, wow, I can't imagine having my first case as an immigration lawyer, to be a family member, especially my spouse. That's super
It's a good
cool.
one.
Yeah.
There's been so many amazing cases and stories along the way, right? And I really don't. I remember all of them, even some of the early stage ones, and this is the most inspirational part of this work, at least my career. I feel so fortunate, right? There was a series of unexpected events and experiences that kind of brought me to that point. And when I started waking up in the morning, and in New York, you start your calls with, I guess I was always situated within the firm at a point of receiving, new inquiries coming in, questions about U.S. immigration. And so I was always exposed to this throughout my career with Davies Associates. And the inquiries were inspirational, always different, right? And so I was on the phone every single day. I mean, for the last 8 years or so, starting with Asia, and then moving moving west, right? And then you end up in Europe midday, and then you meet clients who are actually in the United States, later in that day, and the days just went on like that. And so within my career, I feel fortunate for saying it's been a journey in itself, and one that's continuously gotten better, right? There's always something to learn. So
Do you think, I know that you kind of you handled both U.S. immigration and I guess the global immigration side, right? So did you start while you were working at the firm? Did you start building relationships with other providers around the world? Because I know, I mean, at least from my experience as a U.S. immigration lawyer, if
yeah,
you have a global practice, it doesn't mean that your firm actually handles all those cases. If you're a very large firm, you might have actual offices around the world, but more likely you work with, trusted partners who do
correct.
inbound in China and Australia and in the Netherlands and in South Africa and wherever else. I'm curious, did you start to have that experience as well at the firm?
That came later on,
Mhm.
right? And I guess let me preface it and go back a moment. As a practicing immigration lawyer, that's what I started out as. I dove right in, and you have to know your strengths, right? And for me, I had my Upper West Side apartment. I'll never forget, like a small studio apartment. We didn't even have the door because the bed was too big. So we had to choose a bigger bed or the door. We got rid of the door. But on the floor of our apartment, that was tilted like this in the Upper West Side, were like cases that I've tried to organize the exhibits, right? And, so we have, 3 years of, financial returns here, bank statements here. We have every top page of your passport here. Organizing and filing petitions was never my strong suit. I did it. I had success in the early stages. I had, you can say, well, not failures because we always appealed cases and there were approvals at the end of the day, but there were mistakes, right? And there were also, so you learn by experience has always been kind of a philosophy, experiential learning. And I felt those were challenging days. I don't want to make it sound like the wife's case. That was fun. That was colorful. That was a good time. But when you're dealing with individuals who are relying on you to provide a service, right? And there's weight there. There's family involved, right? They're starting a business. You're moving from one place to another. There's so much involved, and you feel that pressure, right? As a practitioner, and those were challenging times. 3-4 years, really just carving out a skill set to be an immigration lawyer, a practitioner, because U.S. immigration law is so nuanced, as you know. You can specialize in such a small area, and that's what you focus on. That's your niche, right? And you become an expert in that. It's so layered, the U.S. immigration system. So there's always something to learn if you're broadening, your career path, and that's kind of why Mark was also a very good mentor. So for 4 years, I was actually practicing, and I joke around saying that he actually took away my license to practice at some point in time because he was like, David, I think you're maybe better at doing something like this. And what he was referring to is really dealing with clients, in first instance and ongoing, and that relationships, right? Truly understanding where the client's coming from, what are they looking to do, how can we help them? And so, I dedicated a lot of my time purely to that, like a client relations role. We grew the firm a bit. We brought on really talented lawyers who were, did what they did best and, got approvals for client cases. And so, I fell into this role of more of like a client relations role, you can say. And I loved it. I loved it. I could just focus on that. Right. I didn't have to fall over or stumble over exhibits all over my place and FedEx something from a Brazilian client who comes the last day before filing with the papers we need. And, we get it out through FedEx to USAS before he overstays. So, I really, this transition into kind of a client relations lens it's a long-winded way of, addressing your question, Roman, is at that point, I started to branch out a bit and, not only meet with clients, but figure out other areas in the world maybe where there's a connection for global mobility and migration. And that came a bit later on where, start to forge potential partnerships, start to visit other countries. Clients were always the impetus, I think, for those visits, visiting a business or and so forth. But I would always make a point to meet up with lawyers and law firms that were there and other practitioners and learn about their areas of practice. So, yeah, it was a kind of a evolution, I think, to get to that point.
And so you started to meet up with these people. And I guess, my curiosity comes from the idea of like, where did, you spent 4 years practicing, you spent the next about 4 years in this sort of business development, client relationship sort of role. Where did this idea for Relocate sort of come about? Because if it sounds like you started to have more of you started to build this global network, whether by accident or on purpose or purely from, interest. But sort of how did this idea of Relocate come up or come about in your mind, especially since, as you were working at the firm?
Yeah, I think it came out in in many different forms and ways, and rooting even back in experiences, right? That predate, the career path per se. And when I started to get it more involved in kind of the industry and attending events, and understanding the layers of, how an individual gets from one place to another, whether it's the United States or somewhere else, I started to understand the stakeholders in this space and in this industry, and connect some of the dots, and figure out ways at this point from like a private sector. Okay, well, as a law firm, how can we connect with them? How can we refer business to one another? How can we share clients and knowledge transfer, right? And tap into an expertise where, as you alluded to earlier, maybe completely foreign to a U.S. immigration lawyer. They have no idea how to practice law in South Africa. And, so, these conversations that I started to have on a more frequent basis, where I think set the stage, for Relocate in many ways, because we did have a quite, and we still do. I mean, Davies and Associates at the time. I still say we because it's really part of my DNA in many ways. Have a big presence in Vietnam, for example, and in India. Mark was one of the first, I would say, in many ways, to end up in India. I went there a bunch of times after that. We grew a bit of a awareness there, and fostered trust for the firm. And there were so many layers there, and you meet with so many individuals that have various, you can say, services that they provide, idiosyncrasies, local services that they provide. And that started, that exists for a long time in China, for example, right? An agent-driven market in many ways, where maybe you never even get to meet the client. Vietnam is more similar to China in that sense, but India was like a burgeoning market. It wasn't like an agent-driven market yet, so you deal a lot directly with the clients. And I think I started to realize that there, from an individual lens, how do you navigate that? Right. I mean, from an individual who's looking to relocate and find information, what are your first points of inquiry? Right. And, where do you go for information? Right. Whether it's locally or if you dive into the World Wide Web. Right. So, I started to piece together these, you can say, needs for encountering information and finding qualified representation, whether it's locally or in another country, and believe that there was a way to build something that wasn't of private interest, right? Because I was always coming at these strategic partnerships from a private lens, right? Building a firm, growing a firm, and striking up strategic partnership deals with other experts and practitioners, and there's value in that. But I was started to wonder, okay, you make these connections, but how do you provide a bit of a different space that doesn't have a vested interest, if that makes sense?
And it's like creating, the idea of, thinking about Relocate now, the idea of creating content and sort of a marketplace is, there's private interests down the road, but at the very outset, it's just value for the people who are trying to move.
Yeah.
In a sense, it's free value, right? And in the hopes of saying, well, we hope to gain your trust with this information, content, whatever. And then if you need then to utilize the service, you take those next steps on your own. But this initial information is just for you, for free in a way.
Well, yeah, and it's meant to be an ecosystem, right? In that sense, and foster trust through that, because you have the advantage of we don't have to sell anything, right? In the sense, and I always joke around with one of my close friends, like when I was in New York. That I'm a glorified visa salesman, and I mean in the most critical way possible to but it's liberating because you can have this this space to operate in that is completely independent, right? And I guess to answer your question a bit more directly as to how this came about, is because I was attempting to build another company that focused on global citizenship services, right? So I started to speak with agents in South Africa and agents in Nigeria and agents in Egypt and agents across the world, and figure out how to connect these dots and kind of build something that was I don't know, broader than you still can maintain your autonomy as a practitioner, but still in a private space, right? And like an old school kind of referral system, and you're part of one brand, but you're part of a brand, but you still maintain your own brand. So I was trying to grow this concept in the beginning stages, and I kind of shifted away completely from a private model, right, and started to think more about this. What Relocate became, how can it be something that's independent completely? So
I think it's a really good moment for me to just take one quick pause here and just share Marianne's comments. Is what a great story. Congrats. 2 kids later and still going strong. Thank you, Marianne. As always for watching and for your comment. For anyone else, give us a shout out. Let us know where you are. And Marianne, I think I know where you are. I think, but actually, I don't remember. I actually don't remember where you are. I want to say you were out on the West Coast, but I apologize. I should probably know this. But in any case, anybody else want to share where you're watching from, etc., leave a comment. Marianne says, "I love the way you think, David."
Thanks, Marianne. That's encouraging.
So David, I think this is a really good point for me to ask you to explain what is Relocate and how does it work?
Yeah, sure. So Relocate is an independent marketplace for global migration, right? So it's a way where an individual who's looking for information about relocation can find this in an accessible way. So, we've drafted and worked on original evergreen content that, provides practical, meaningful guidance about moving to a destination. And the content itself, I think if you dig a bit deeper into what you see, it's very high level. So, we decided to soft launch with 11 countries to try and validate this as a marketplace to see if it works, right? And within these 11 countries of destination, you can find information about, whether it's generally what's life like in moving to France, what's it like to start a business in Paris? Do I have to pay taxes in the United Kingdom? How do I retire in Italy? And so, we did a lot of market research and figuring out, this high level content, but not getting into the granular details of giving legal advice, right? So we'll give a broad kind of big picture overview of core, what we believe are, interesting topics and informative topics. And this is where the membership concept comes in terms of advisors and the legal practitioners who are licensed and the experts in the space to fill in between these lines, right? There's really infinite space to fill in between these lines. So, the granular details of moving from A to B, you won't find that through Relocate original content, but you'll find that on the platform, and you'll find that from a variety of sources that are here in this one space. So maybe you have 2 or 3 U.S. immigration lawyers that are providing valuable information about, getting the international parolee role, the IEP, and, maybe you have multiple immigration lawyers giving different perspectives in the U.S. about, getting an H-1B visa, whatever it may be. This is being sourced from the legal practitioners. So the idea was to provide a platform for immigration practitioners to cross-pollinate content that they're writing maybe on LinkedIn or on their blog site or in other mediums, to try and connect with this engaged audience of individuals who are looking for this information. So we're very much trying to be as a medium in that place. And the other core component of this is a direct channel to the advisors and letting that individual make an informed decision and kind of get to know who that potential advisor is, by reading a bit about them and seeing maybe what articles they're writing about, what core areas of expertise they market, in a space that is not private, right? So that I think this is the overarching components of Relocate at this time. What's out there now is the MVP. It's what we were able to fund, what we were able to launch with, and we have a beautiful engineering roadmap with a bunch of features that we do hope to finance and continue to introduce into the marketplace. But what's out there now is the bare bones. It's something that went through almost a year of product discovery, individual testing, meaning we actually brought a group of individuals who maybe would be looking to relocate into a space, and we asked a ton of questions. We went through a lot of work to get to the point of actually having what is what you see now, which is our soft release. So
That's awesome.
thanks.
I just one quick note just to answer the questions here. Marianne's in San Francisco, and thank you again, Marianne. Donald Vega coming in from Vancouver saying, thank you for sharing your inspiring story, David. So thank you. And then thanks, Emmanuel, keep them coming, Roman. Thanks for sharing your story, David. Emmanuel, tell us, I forget where you're at. So let us know. I forget if you're in the US or maybe I think you might be abroad, but I forget. Any case, thanks for your comments, y'all, and definitely keep them coming and ask questions along the way, especially as we're getting into learning a little bit more about Relocate. I was going to say, David, that one of the features I do, obviously playing around with the website and checking it out, I do like that you learn a lot about the country, and then you can sort of see who that sort of, I guess, partner or featured immigration professional is, who's creating that content, and then you could learn about them, and then effectively directly book a call or a consultation with them through the platform. So it's like it's sort of a one-stop shop, if you will, at least for that in very, very initial conversation there with the provider based on the country that the individual wants to go to. So you said that you have the MVP out so far. You've done a lot of testing, a lot of iteration on the product, on the experience. You've obviously launched, I think you said 11 countries, right? How has that launch sort of been? I mean, from whatever you feel comfortable sharing, did you have to go out and get outside funding? Were you able to self-fund it? And the reason I'm asking this is because I think in part, really, it's the crux of this whole show. I wish when I was starting Laborless, I had anywhere to go to learn a little bit about what the heck do I do next? What are the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps? Do I need funding or do I not need funding? Do I have to get an outsourced development team, or can I, kind of build it on my own, or what else? So I guess, what have been some of the ways which you've been able to get up to this stage right now?
Yeah, a lot of hard work, that's for sure, and sleepless nights. Definitely was fortunate to, have a bit of a cushion to bootstrap this, with my own funds in the beginning, and maintaining a balance here, right? And that wasn't easy because it was very new, uncharted territory, and so there was a lot of due diligence that went in the beginning. You have some broad stroke ideas, and those ideas start to form, and then you start to figure out, okay, well, how do I actually make this happen? Who needs to get involved? So in the beginning, I think there were 2 core pillars, Roman, that I really identified a need for, and it was the technology, it was the engineering, and it was, the core content. So I focused on these two pillars and started to think about, who can I get involved, who's in this space, and have those conversations. And I guess one thing I wanted to also emphasize is, there were certain and there are certain challenges that we want to confront, right, in the immigration industry, and that's also another reason why, Relocate did come into life. And mainly it's access to this information, because, as where do you go to find information generally if you're looking to relocate? I mean, if you type in a keyword search term, and you're a marketing guy, you probably have a way better idea as to where this goes. But one of the primary sources is a government website, right? And so, starting to dig around in these government websites, you realize that some are much better than others. And it's actually, there's some of it is, it's a beautiful study to do as well. And, I think one of the goals we wanted to confront, or one of the challenges we wanted to confront, is, to make the ease of access to this information, in a very, kind of intuitive way, right? And so the engineering component, was focusing a lot on this, right? What's the journey? All right. How do where do you start? And, what's the end goal here? And so, in involving individuals in this idea and concept, I was working with a lot with agencies in the beginning, kind of figure out, who can I partner with, who would potentially be interested in this. And, I had months of kind of due diligence and calls, and learned a lot through that, and ended up finding some good partners in this space, working with an unbelievable engineering firm that's one of our main partners to this day, that's based out of Poland, right? And they're in the tech space, and they have an incredible team. And so they have vested interests in what we're doing, right? And so they're pretty much a partner. And when this started to come to life and we developed the content, again, we have a somewhat of a lean team. We have a very lean team internally, but we have, you can say, a bit of an operational bandwidth because we have good partners. So we don't have like we're not even at a seed phase at this point, Roman. There's conversations, right? Because we have goals to scale. As I mentioned, this is just an MVP. So, we have an engineering roadmap to release various features, and there's obviously a cost to that development. But before we even get to that point in time, we really need to validate Relocate as a marketplace, and building a marketplace. I started to read a lot of books. I started to reach out to individuals who wrote those books, right? I had brought on an amazing board of advisors that didn't come with a price tag, because they're vested in the idea and the vision of it. And it started to take a life of its own that went well beyond anything that I could do in the individual capacity. And so, I'm super fortunate for those that breathe life into the development of this. And what was the most encouraging for me, aside from kind of seeing it take a life of its own, were the conversations that I had with the advisors. Because, as mentioned, if we didn't have a member base, if we didn't have an advisor base, then, where would we be? It wouldn't be a marketplace. It would just be, a nice looking website. And, these conversations I had over the span of 7 months, and I'm having to this day, almost every day. And I was struggling in the beginning with the strategy. I said, okay, do I ping 35,000 lawyers in these 11 countries and see who joins? Or do I focus intimately on who I believe might be interested, right? And where we can complement that existing practice. And maybe as a marketer, Roman, you might get that completely, not to be invasive, but to build something, engineer something that actually is going to be complementary to what your existing practice is.
Yeah.
And that was an objective. It is an objective, right? Aside from the kind of an overarching vision to build an ecosystem and have like this human narrative as a thread that fosters trust and ultimately does create this sense of transparency and equity, right? Globally, okay, these are big ideas. But if I bring it back to one reason why we're still here today, and I still believe at least we got another 3 months in us. Hopefully, I can get another show with Roman if I'm invited back. Is the advisors.
Mhm.
To be completely, I've had such encouraging conversations through the span of 7 months with every single advisor that's there now, and it's really because of this initial ambassador base. That's what we're calling it, an ambassador program. It's limited per country. So they said, okay, I kind of see what you're trying to do. We'll give it a try.
Mhm.
Oh, there's no membership fee. Okay, well, I don't have much to lose, I guess. And we've built a team around that, right? When we built a team internally on solely, working and collaborating with our members to figure out how can we optimize this experience? How do we, continue to collaborate and create synergy and have a value proposition for the members, for the advisors. So that's one side of the equation.
What can you share about? I'm sure you're talking about advisors, but I'm really curious to hear about what you
Sure.
can share with regards to like what is coming for the future, right? I mean, I get it. I mean, the future is never guaranteed, and there's it's one thing to have a roadmap, it's another thing to actually, of course, continue to implement all of that. But what are some of the things that maybe people can think about and or look forward to that you're able to kind of share with Relocate, whether on the tech side or maybe on maybe more countries,
Yeah.
things like
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. So yeah, great question. And it's such an interesting time as well, right? I mean, like for this to come out of, in this time, rather crazy or, it's serendipitous. I have no idea, and and the conversations that we're kind of finding ourselves involved in now have to do with this aspect of really transcending borders, breaking down these borders, and the future of work. And you don't have to go far to just Google something like this to see the pulse of what's happening. And the entire pandemic has just evolved the way people are thinking about working, and it's just because of this experience. I mean, from the corporate level down to an individual level, the sense of having a laptop or working remotely from somewhere, having a work-life balance, and maybe a physical commute versus working from home or working from a co-sharing office, or it's it's evolving in such a way that, I mean, you have futurists who are already predicting what's happening, and I'm by no means thinking that we're predicting anything. I just think we're positioning ourselves in a really interesting time to build this ecosystem where there is this immediate connection that you can have to live and work and migrate somewhere, and hopefully we can be that resource, right? For individuals, for agile companies who want to move abroad, etc. um, there's so many trends that are happening, so many interesting conversations that are happening with regards to this sense of I can live and work from anywhere.
Mhm.
That global citizenship, being a global citizen, is a mindset. It's there's no universal passport. I mean, however, the more you think about where you are in the world, and that you're not just a citizen of a country, but you're part of this planet. We're in a part of a human race, and borders start to disappear a bit when you
Mhm.
start to think of in this dimension, and it's a beautiful thing. And beautiful connections are made, and there's always having a national identity, having visas, having immigration pathways, and that for national security reasons and so forth. I mean, I always believe that this is, I mean, beyond the geopolitical matters. I do believe that people are realizing there's more opportunities to move places, and it's not as stressful as maybe you thought it was. And maybe you do it a few times in life, or maybe you don't. Maybe you find a new place, you settle in. But yeah, when you talk about, I guess, I'm still being abstract, I guess, a little bit about what the future holds.
No, it's hard to know.
Yeah, it's hard to know. It's hard to know.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's definitely a trend, and there are a lot of different. First of all, corporates are looking into this further to see what they can do in terms of sending their employees abroad.
Mm.
Are they relocating people in the same way that they were before? Is it going to be what type of visas are they applying for? Because now we're seeing, for example, digital nomad visas popping up all over the world, et cetera. So the landscape is changing. And then, of course, to your point, from the individual's perspective, even if you don't work in a corporation, but maybe run your own business or you're a freelancer, can you look at the world as being a bit more of your oyster than before?
Yeah, it's
So no,
exciting.
and I get it. I mean, I think it sounds like you're directionally trying to align yourself with where things are probably going, and giving people access to information and professionals, and eventually an even more robust platform in terms of actually making that move, that relocation happen, which I suppose is the
And seem possible,
and
right?
yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
hopefully to inspire, Roman, really. And like the human narrative is a major part of our identity. We're starting to run a couple exciting campaigns very soon. One that revolves around stories. So, we're running campaigns for individuals to actually share their relocation stories,
Mhm.
right? So if anyone's out there, and you have a story that you're willing to share, this is something we're running. We're, giving flight vouchers for even when the world, has less travel restrictions, which I believe it's starting to. Well, you can fly on us. So one of the, there's always this human narrative that we want to maintain, because that's where the experience is. That's even where practitioners improve their trade and skill set, right? And so, we have a few interesting campaigns. I think that our first campaigns, you can say, that revolve around this, Roman. And if I were to say where we're going, it's kind of embodied in this, and it's embodied again in the member base and the advisor base, because even the licensed practitioner lawyers, I mean, they can be nomadic as well, right?
Mhm.
I mean, an Australian lawyer working in Jordan, right? Or a French immigration lawyer working in Mexico. So, we can prove we're still cool, Roman, even though we're lawyers.
Right. It's
When
a
you look
hard
us up.
it's a hard hill to climb, but we can do it, I think.
That's right.
So where can people learn a little bit more about Relocate? I know that the website is relocate.world,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah. If you want to read a bit about kind of the mission statement, you just do a backslash about
mhm.
there, and you can dig a bit deeper.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I always like to kind of end these conversations with maybe something a little bit kind of fun or different. I'm curious, you know, you said you mentioned, you traveled quite a bit. How many countries did you travel to? And I hate to ask for a favorite because I think every country is different, but do you have any
Yeah.
like very, the kind of that story where if you're sitting around a campfire or something like that's the
I
travel
love
story
this.
you tell?
Yeah. Yeah. Can I join you? Really? Can we go like upstate? Can I join you? Chop some wood?
A
Could
hundred
really.
percent, 100%. I'm actually recruiting.
All right. All right. Well, sign me up. Sign me up, please. Um, yeah. I honestly don't know a number, and I never kind of
Mm,
tracked it that way.
mm,
For me, it was like density, right? It was depth. How, in that sense, for me, it's pretty easy, right? I mean, I align that question with what was the most impactful, the
right.
most transformative in your life. Because I've, been to a fair share of places, and for me, the depth was, in China, right? I mean, that's kind of was so foreign, it was so different, and just a full immersion. And for that, it was transformative. I mean, I came back with a wife. No, I'm just I didn't literally come back, but I did meet my wife at a cafe in Shanghai on her last day going back to Italy. My first day arriving in Shanghai, and we
Wow.
met at a cafe. So it's kind of, that's another story.
Well,
That's a campfire story.
I
That's a
think you got.
campfire story.
All right. Can you share a little bit about how that meeting went?
The meeting. Well, they didn't pay any attention to us, her and her friend. And I showed up with a backpack, smelling like chicken feet and train. And she was eating. And at one point, a potato flew over to me, literally, like we were sitting next to it, and it flew on my plate. And, I made one of those American comments, free food, thank you, and I got some advice for where to go next. Let's crash on her friend's couch, and we always kept in touch. And when she came to New York, we got together again there, and it's the rest is history.
Wow.
As they say, yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, life is out there, man.
And now you're living in Italy.
Living in Italy.
Look at that's amazing.
Yeah. It's a good place to be. It's a good launching pad. That's a good
incredible.
place to be. It's a good work-life balance. So very fortunate to be here, Roman. So
well, thank you, David. This is so cool. What a great story too. As a side note, I've definitely been like the broke backpacker, whether it's South America or, Europe or Asia or wherever. And definitely appreciate free food. So I think I get where your mind went, because that was a joke, but it was also partly not a joke. So
part survival. Next time it'd be great if I can interview you, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Flip it around a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm interested in that one.
I appreciate that. We can definitely make it happen.
Cool.
Well, David, thank you. I know it's late, so
no worries.
I appreciate you taking the time, and appreciate you joining and sharing your story. And
of course,
it's cool to hear how impactful travel and just kind of international experiences can be on not only our career paths, but of course on like ultimately business ideas. And if anything, I think hopefully this show, this episode with you and other episodes will inspire maybe, or, push someone in the direction of starting a business, maybe a tech business, to make the immigration and mobility process easier, better, faster, more efficient, safer, et cetera. So if anything, I think this story has definitely delivered that. And so I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for anybody who's still out there, and feel free to reach out as well. So great, it's been fun.
Likewise. Now go enjoy some grappa and then get some sleep.
Well, it's not really water in here.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Thanks, David.
All right. Take care.
Thanks everybody for joining, for being here. Appreciate it. What a cool story. I really want to get back to traveling internationally now. And I hope, as borders open up and to come out there and see the world, and hopefully meet some of y'all who tune in and watch and listen, and, leave awesome comments and questions. So thank you as always to everyone for being here. I will see you next week, same time. Well, today was a little bit earlier. So we'll see if it's going to be at the same time as always, 4 p.m. Eastern, or if we could make it a little bit earlier moving forward. But in any case, see you next week. In the meantime, stay safe and have an awesome weekend.